The sound of a pistol shot ricocheted through the dusty main street of Promise Creek, Montana Territory, in the summer of 1876, causing Beatrice Harlow to duck instinctively behind a water trough as she stepped off the stagecoach. Her heart pounded against her corset as the town sheriff apprehended a drunken miner who'd been firing into the air. This was not the peaceful new beginning she had envisioned when she'd answered the mail-order bride advertisement from a cattle rancher seeking a respectable, unmarried woman of good character. The word unmarried had made her stomach twist with guilt even as she'd penned her response, carefully omitting any mention of the husband she'd buried just 6 months prior. "Miss Harlow," a deep voice pulled her from her thoughts. "I'm Cole Xavier. I believe you were expecting me." Beatrice straightened up, brushing dust from her navy traveling dress as she faced the man who would soon be her husband. He stood a head taller than her, broad-shouldered, and lean-hipped in a manner that spoke of hard physical work. His face was tanned and weathered by the sun, with striking blue eyes that reminded her of the Montana sky she'd admired from the stagecoach window. His light brown hair curled slightly beneath a well-worn Stetson, and despite the trail dust on his boots, he'd clearly made an effort to look presentable, with a freshly trimmed beard and clean shirt. "Mr. Xavier," she replied, extending her gloved hand. "Yes, I'm Beatrice Harlow." "Thank you for meeting me." His calloused hand enveloped hers, and a surprising warmth spread up her arm. "Please call me Cole. Welcome to Promise Creek." His eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her wonder if he could somehow read the lie she'd written in her letters. "Beatrice, then," she offered with a small smile. "Though most call me Bea." Cole nodded and reached for her trunk, lifting it effortlessly. "My wagon's just down the street. We've got about an hour's ride to the ranch." He glanced at her city clothes. "Hope you don't mind a bit of dust." Bea squared her shoulders. "Mr. Xavier Cole, I assure you I'm not afraid of a little dirt. I'm here to build a life, not to maintain the pretense of a Boston parlor." A hint of approval flickered in his eyes. "That's good to hear. Life out here isn't easy, but it's honest." The word honest struck her like a physical blow. She swallowed hard and followed him to the wagon, her secret weighing heavier with each step. The ride to Xavier Ranch gave Bea time to study her future husband as he handled the team with capable hands. Occasional glances from those piercing blue eyes told her he was doing the same. The land around them was wild and beautiful rolling grasslands flanked by distant mountains, dotted with cattle bearing the Xavier brand. "Your ranch is larger than I expected," she ventured, breaking the silence. "Started with almost nothing 5 years ago," Cole replied, pride evident in his voice. "Now I've got 3,000 acres and 500 head of cattle. Built the house myself last year, thinking it was time to fill it properly. With a wife," she said softly. He nodded, keeping his eyes on the trail. "A man can build a ranch, but it takes a woman to make it a home. At least that's what my mother always said. And your parents, are they?" "Both gone. Pa died in the war, Ma followed 3 years later. I came west afterward." "Nothing left for me in Virginia," he glanced at her. "Your letters mentioned you lost your parents to influenza. That part, at least, wasn't a lie." "Yes, 2 years ago. I've been working as a seamstress since then. And no other family, no attachments back east." His question seemed casual, but Bea detected a note of something else beneath it. "None," she said firmly, ignoring the twist of guilt in her stomach as she thought of the simple grave marker in a Boston cemetery that bore the name Matthew Harlow. The Xavier homestead came into view as they crested a gentle hill, a sturdy 2-story house built of solid timber, with a wide porch and glass windows that caught the afternoon sun. Nearby stood a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings that comprised a working cattle ranch. Smoke curled from the chimney, and Bea was surprised to see flower beds flanking the front path. "Mrs. Ortiz comes up from town 3 times a week to cook and clean," Cole explained, noting her surprise at the homey touches. "But she's getting on in years, can't manage everything." "It's lovely," Bea said honestly. "You've built something wonderful here." For the first time, Cole's serious expression softened into a genuine smile. "Wait until you see inside." The interior of the house was simple but well crafted, with polished wooden floors and sturdy furniture. Bea ran her fingers along a carved sideboard in the dining room. "You made this?" she asked, admiring the craftsmanship. Cole nodded. "Winter evenings get long. I find working with my hands keeps the mind occupied." He showed her to a bedroom upstairs, her own room. He explained somewhat awkwardly, "Until after the wedding." The room was bright and airy, with a handmade quilt on the bed and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the ranch. "I thought we might be married on Saturday," Cole said, setting her trunk down. "Pastor Williams can perform the ceremony, nothing fancy, but—" He hesitated. "Unless you'd prefer more time to settle in." Bea's heart raced, 5 days to decide if she could go through with this deception. "Saturday would be fine," she heard herself say. That evening, after a simple supper cooked by Mrs. Ortiz, Bea and Cole sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. The vast open landscape both thrilled and terrified her, so different from Boston's crowded streets. "Why did you answer my advertisement, Bea?" Cole asked suddenly. "Truth now, plenty of women stay in the East. What brings you 2,000 miles to marry a stranger?" She considered her answer carefully. "After my parents died, I realized I was living half a life, surviving, not living. I wanted a future, something to build, something real." That much was absolutely true. Cole studied her face in the fading light. "And you think you can find that here?" "With me? I hope so," she whispered. His hand found hers on the porch railing, warm and strong. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Bea, but I promise you this: I'll work every day to make sure you never regret coming here." The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache with guilt. The next few days passed in a blur as Bea familiarized herself with the workings of the ranch. She met the ranch hands, 4 weathered cowboys who tipped their hats respectfully and tried not to stare too obviously at the boss's city bride. She learned her way around the kitchen, studied the vegetable garden Mrs. Ortiz had started, and began to understand the rhythms of ranch life. Cole was often busy with ranch work, but he made time each evening to sit with her, slowly sharing stories of his life and listening to carefully edited tales of hers. She found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his thoughtfulness, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, a rare but increasingly frequent occurrence. On Friday evening, the night before their wedding, they walked along the creek that gave the nearby town its name. The setting sun cast long shadows across the grass, and the air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Cole asked. "Yes," Bea admitted. "Aren't you?" He considered this. "I suppose I should be, but mostly I'm just ready. I've been building this place for years, always with the thought that someday it would be more than just land and cattle." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I want to build something lasting, Bea, a legacy, a family." The word family sent a pang through her heart. She'd been pregnant when Matthew died, a precious secret. They'd barely had time to celebrate before influenza claimed him. The grief and stress had caused her to lose the baby 2 weeks later, compounding her despair. "Bea," Cole's concerned voice pulled her back to the present. "You went somewhere else just now," she forced a smile. "Just thinking about tomorrow, it's a big step." Cole's eyes softened and he took her hands in his. "I know we don't know each other well yet, but I want you to understand something." His voice grew serious. "When I make vows tomorrow, I'll mean every word. You'll be my wife in every sense, and I'll be faithful to you until death. That's my promise." The earnestness in his eyes was her undoing. How could she pledge herself to this good, honest man while carrying such a lie? "Cole, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice trembling. But at that moment, a ranch hand came galloping up, calling Cole's name. A section of fence was down in the north pasture, and cattle were getting out. The moment was lost as Cole apologized and hurried away, promising to return as soon as possible. Bea walked back to the house alone, her confession unspoken. She spent a sleepless night wrestling with her conscience. By dawn, she had made her decision. She couldn't begin this marriage with a lie between them, no matter the consequences. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. Mrs. Ortiz helped Bea dress in her best gown, a dove-gray silk with delicate lace trim that she'd sewn herself. It wasn't a traditional wedding dress, but it was the finest thing she owned. "You look beautiful, señorita," the older woman said, patting Bee's hand. Mr. Xavier is a good man, hard-working, honorable. You will be happy here. Honorable, the word twisted in Bee's heart. Cole was waiting for her on the porch, dressed in a black suit that transformed him from rancher to gentleman. His eyes widened when he saw her, and something in his expression gave her courage. "Could we speak privately, before we go to town?" she asked. Concern flickered across his face, but he nodded, leading her to the parlor and closing the door. Bee took a deep breath. "Cole, I haven't been entirely truthful with you." The words tumbled out before she could lose her nerve. "I was married before. My husband, Matthew, died 6 months ago of influenza. We were only married for a year." Cole's expression froze, his blue eyes suddenly distant. "I see. I'm not a widow seeking a convenient arrangement," she hurried on. "When I answered your advertisement, I truly wanted a fresh start, a new life. But I knew you specifically wanted someone who had never been married, and I lied. I'm so sorry." Cole turned away, staring out the window at the ranch he'd built. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "Were you in love with him?" he finally asked, his voice rough. The question surprised her. "Yes," she admitted softly. "But he's gone now, and I've mourned him. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't ready to build a new life." Cole's shoulders were rigid. "You should have told me. I had a right to know." "Yes, you did. That's why I'm telling you now before we take vows." Bee fought to keep her voice steady. "I understand if you want to call off the wedding. I can take the next stagecoach back east." Cole turned slowly to face her. "Is there anything else I should know? Any other surprises waiting?" "No," she whispered. "That's the truth, I swear it." He studied her face for a long moment. "I need time to think. Pastor Williams will be expecting us in town in an hour." Bee nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She watched him stride out of the house, his back straight and unyielding. Once he was gone, she sank into a chair, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. An hour later, she was still there, her packed valise at her feet when Cole returned. His expression was unreadable as he crossed the room to stand before her. "I've been walking and thinking," he said quietly, "trying to understand why this matters so much to me." Bee looked up at him, waiting. "When I wrote that advertisement, asking for an unmarried woman, it wasn't about." He struggled for words. "It wasn't about wanting someone untouched. It was about wanting someone without ghosts, without comparisons. I didn't want to compete with memories." "Oh, Cole," she breathed. "No one could compete with you. You're nothing like Matthew." He was a bookkeeper, gentle and scholarly. She gestured helplessly at his strength, his capability. A muscle worked in his jaw. "Do you think you could love me, Bee? Not just respect me or appreciate what I can provide, but truly love me?" The raw vulnerability in his question made her heart ache. "I think I already do," she admitted. "Why else would telling you the truth matter so much?" Something shifted in his eyes. He took her hands and pulled her to her feet, then, without warning, he kissed her a kiss full of hunger and promise that left her breathless. "Your past is your own," he said roughly, his forehead pressed against hers. "But your future is mine alone, if you still want it to be." "I do," she whispered. "More than anything." They were married that afternoon in Promise Creek's small white church. As Bee repeated her vows, she felt a sense of rightness that had been absent from her life since the day she'd become a widow. When Cole slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his eyes never left hers, full of a promise that went beyond the words they'd just spoken. The first weeks of marriage were a sweet discovery. Cole was a considerate, passionate husband who treated her with a tender respect that made her fall more deeply in love with each passing day. Together, they settled into the rhythms of ranch life, Cole working with the cattle and land, Bee managing the household and starting projects of her own, including a larger vegetable garden and a small flock of chickens. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, planning for the future and sharing more of their pasts. Bee gradually told Cole about Matthew, finding that speaking of him no longer brought sharp pain but a gentle nostalgia. Cole, in turn, shared stories of his parents and his difficult years after the war. "I was angry for a long time," he admitted one night, his arm around her shoulders as they watched fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "Angry at God, at the world. I came west because I couldn't stand to be around people anymore. Thought I'd live alone with my cattle and die alone too. What changed? Bee asked, nestling closer to his warmth. Cole's fingers absently stroked her arm. Time, hard work. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was building something worth sharing. He kissed the top of her head. I'm glad it's you I'm sharing it with. As summer faded into autumn, Promise Creek experienced an unexpected boom. Gold had been discovered in the nearby foothills, and the sleepy town transformed almost overnight as prospectors and opportunists poured in. Cole watched the changes with a wary eye. Gold brings trouble, he told Bee as they drove into town for supplies. Men looking for easy riches don't much care about other folks' property or rights. His concerns proved prophetic. Within weeks, there were disputes over claims, fights in the saloons, and increasingly bold cattle rustling. Sheriff Morgan was overwhelmed trying to maintain order. One crisp October morning, Cole rode out with two of his hands to check on a remote section of the herd. He kissed Bee goodbye, promising to be back before dark. But as the sun began to set with no sign of his return, a sense of foreboding settled over her. When hoofbeats finally approached the house near midnight, it wasn't Cole but his ranch hand, Tomas, bleeding from a bullet graze to his shoulder. Rustlers, he gasped as Bee helped him inside. They were taking cattle from the north pasture. We caught them in the act. There was shooting. He winced as she began cleaning his wound. Mr. Xavier and Jim went after them, told me to ride back and get help. Bee's heart pounded with fear, but she kept her hands steady as she bandaged Tomas. How many were there? 4, maybe 5, wearing masks. Tomas shook his head. I'm sorry, Mrs. Xavier, I should have stayed with him. You followed orders, Bee said firmly. Now rest here. I'm going to town for the sheriff. Despite Tomas's protests, Bee hitched the wagon herself and drove through the darkness to Promise Creek. She found Sheriff Morgan at his office, roused the town doctor for Tomas, and gathered a search party of 5 men, including the blacksmith and the mercantile owner who had known Cole for years. Dawn was breaking as they returned to the ranch. Tomas insisted on joining the search despite his injury, directing them to where he'd last seen Cole. They found signs of a struggle at the edge of a ravine, blood on the rocks, spent cartridges, and drag marks leading down to a rocky stream bed. Bee's throat tightened with fear as they followed the trail. After what seemed an eternity, they heard a weak call for help. In a shallow cave formed by a rocky overhang, they found Cole and Jim. Jim had been shot in the leg and couldn't walk. Cole, battered and bruised from what appeared to be a severe beating, had somehow dragged his injured hand to shelter. Bee, Cole whispered when he saw her, his face pale beneath a mask of dirt and dried blood. Knew you'd come. 3 days later, with both injured men recovering at the ranch under the doctor's care, Cole told Bee what had happened. They'd confronted the rustlers and been ambushed. Jim was shot immediately. Cole had managed to wound one of the thieves before being overpowered. I recognized him when his mask slipped, Cole said grimly. Vince Parrish. Came to town about a month ago, claiming to be a prospector. Been watching the ranch, I'd wager. Sheriff Morgan organized a posse that tracked Parrish and his gang to an abandoned mining shack 15 miles away. There was a shootout, and while 2 of the rustlers were killed, Parrish and another escaped into the mountains. As Cole healed, Bee rarely left his side. The attack had shaken her deeply, forcing her to confront how completely her heart now belonged to this man and the life they were building together. I could have lost you, she whispered one night as she changed the bandages on his cracked ribs. Cole caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. But you didn't. I'm too stubborn to die before we've had our life together. His blue eyes held hers. I promised you a future, remember? Weeks passed, and as Cole's strength returned, so did his determination to protect what was his. He hired 2 more ranch hands and began teaching Bee how to shoot, insisting she carry a small revolver whenever he wasn't with her. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing shorter days and long, intimate evenings by the fire. As Christmas approached, Promise Creek's brief gold boom faded, the shallow deposits quickly exhausted. Many of the prospectors moved on, and the town returned to something like its former quiet state. Parrish and his remaining partner had never been found, however, and the knowledge that they might return cast a shadow over the ranch. Cole took to making extra rounds each evening, checking locks and keeping a rifle near at hand. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, Bee and Cole exchanged simple gifts by the light of their decorated tree. Cole had carved her a beautiful jewelry box with wildflowers etched into the lid. Bee had sewn him a warm quilt for their bed, pieced together in a pattern that resembled the mountains visible from their bedroom window. "I have another gift," Bee said softly after they'd admired each other's handiwork. "One I can't wrap." Cole looked at her questioningly. "I'm going to have a baby," she whispered, joy and uncertainty mingling in her voice. In early summer, Cole's expression transformed, wonder replacing weariness. He gathered her into his arms with a gentleness that contrasted with his strength. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby," Bee nodded against his chest, relieved by his joy. "I was afraid, with everything that's happened." "This is what matters," Cole said firmly. "This is what we're building for, a family, a legacy." He placed a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "I'll keep you both safe." "I swear it." That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind whistle around the eaves, Cole suddenly stiffened. "Did you hear that?" Bee held her breath, listening. A faint creak came from downstairs, too deliberate to be the house settling. Cole slipped from the bed, retrieving his rifle. "Stay here," he whispered. "Lock the door behind me." But Bee was already reaching for her robe and the revolver he'd insisted she keep in her bedside drawer. "No," she said firmly. "We face this together." The stubborn set of her jaw told Cole argument was futile. With a nod, he motioned for her to stay behind him as they crept down the hallway toward the stairs. A floorboard creaked below, followed by a muffled curse. Cole signaled for Bee to wait at the top of the stairs, then moved silently down, keeping to the edges where the wood was less likely to betray his presence. Bee held her breath, the revolver steady in her hands as she watched Cole disappear into the darkness below. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then came sounds of a struggle, a crash, a grunt of pain, a shot that echoed deafeningly in the confined space. "Cole," she cried, fear propelling her down the stairs despite his instructions. In the dim light from the banked fire, she made out two figures grappling on the floor near the kitchen door. Cole was underneath, struggling with a bearded man she recognized instantly as Vince Parrish. A knife gleamed in Parrish's hand, inching closer to Cole's throat as they wrestled. Without hesitation, Bee raised the revolver. "Stop or I'll shoot," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Parrish glanced up, his face twisting with fury. For a moment he seemed to consider charging her. Then he smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "Pretty wife you got, Xavier. Shame she'll be a widow twice over." The words hit Bee like a physical blow. How did he know? The momentary distraction gave Cole the opening he needed. He bucked upward, throwing Parrish off balance, then drove his fist into the man's jaw with a sickening crack. The knife clattered to the floor. Bee kept the gun trained on Parrish as Cole scrambled to his feet and retrieved his fallen rifle. "Tie him up," she said, her voice shaking now. "The sheriff can deal with him." Cole bound Parrish with rope from the barn, then lit lamps and stoked the fire. As light filled the room, Bee saw blood seeping through Cole's nightshirt. "You're hurt," she gasped. "Just a cut," he grimaced. "Not deep." Parrish, sitting bound in a kitchen chair, spat blood onto the floor. "Should have killed you when I had the chance, Xavier." "Wouldn't be the first time I put a husband in the ground." A cold feeling washed over Bee. "What did you say?" Parrish's eyes gleamed with malice. "Your husband, Matthew Harlow. Boston last spring, influenza, they said." He laughed, a harsh sound. Amazing what a little poison in the medicine can do. The room seemed to tilt around Bee. You killed Matthew. Why?" "Business," Parrish shrugged. "He was a bookkeeper, noticed some discrepancies in the accounts I was managing, started asking questions." His gaze hardened. "Nobody asks questions about my business." Cole moved to Bee's side, steadying her. "You followed her here," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Why? Didn't know she existed until I saw her in town," Parrish replied. "Recognized her from a photograph in Harlow's office. Couldn't believe my luck. Thought she might have papers, evidence her husband kept." His eyes narrowed. "Then I thought, why not take some cattle while I'm at it? 2 birds, 1 stone." The sound of horses outside interrupted his taunting. The ranch hands, alerted by the gunshot, arrived with weapons ready. Cole sent one immediately to town for the sheriff. As dawn broke, Sheriff Morgan arrived with his deputy. They took Parrish into custody, promising he'd face justice not only for the rustling and assault, but for murder once they telegraphed the authorities in Boston. After they left, Cole found Bea sitting motionless by the fire, still trying to process what she'd learned. Matthew hadn't died of illness. He'd been murdered because of his integrity, his unwillingness to overlook wrongdoing. "I'm sorry," Cole said softly, sitting beside her. "About Matthew, about what happened to him." Bea looked up, tears streaming down her face. "All this time I thought it was just cruel fate, that life was random and unfair, but someone chose to take him from me." Her hands clenched in her lap. "Our baby, I lost our baby after he died. The grief." Cole gathered her into his arms, holding her as sobs shook her body. "Let it out," he whispered against her hair. "I've got you now." When her tears finally subsided, Bea pulled back enough to look into Cole's face. "How did you know, that night on the creek when I told you about Matthew, you asked if I loved him, not why I lied, but if I loved him?" Cole's eyes softened. "Because that was what mattered. I needed to know if you were running from heartbreak or toward a new chance at love." "Both, I think," she admitted. But now, knowing what really happened to Matthew, she placed a protective hand over her stomach. "I'm grateful he had justice, but I'm not looking back anymore. This is my life now, with you, with our child." Cole cupped her face in his hands. "Your past made you who you are, Bea, the woman I love. I wouldn't change that, even the painful parts." As spring returned to the ranch, bringing new calves and tender green shoots in Bea's garden, a letter arrived from Boston. The authorities had discovered evidence in Parrish's lodgings that corroborated his confession. Matthew's name had been cleared of any wrongdoing, and Parrish would hang for his crimes. Bea read the letter on the porch, the same spot where she and Cole had sat that first evening nearly a year ago. A sense of peace settled over her as she folded the paper and placed it in her pocket. Matthew had the justice he deserved. She could move forward without the shadow of unanswered questions. Cole found her there as the sun began to set, her hands resting on her swollen belly where their child grew stronger each day. "Everything all right?" he asked, settling beside her. Bea smiled, taking his hand and placing it where the baby was kicking. "Perfect. We're building our future, just like you promised." Cole's eyes crinkled as he smiled, the expression no longer rare but a daily gift that warmed her heart. "I keep my promises, Mrs. Xavier, especially to you." As twilight deepened around the ranch, they'd made their home. Bea leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that while her past had shaped her, their future stretched before them, full of possibilities neither of them could have imagined when a city woman stepped off a stagecoach to meet a rancher with dreams of legacy. The journey had been unexpected, marked by both joy and pain, truth and deception. But as the first star appeared in the deepening blue sky, Bea Xavier knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged.